So welcome everyone, and thank you for coming to our first R3 session of the year. I'm Tony Pargagan. I'm the Associate Department Chair, and I've had the privilege of meeting almost all of you, but I haven't met everyone. So we're actually going to do some introductions here in just a few minutes so we know who's in the room. We do these sessions as a chance for you to learn more about our faculty members, to learn more about our students, and introduce today's session here in just a second. Before we get started, though, I do want to read our land acknowledgement, which we adopted in the department a few years ago, which states that we within the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy Studies at Florida State University acknowledge that our university is located on the indigenous lands of the Appalachian Nation, the Muskogee Creek Nation, the Miccosukee Tribe of Florida, and the Seminole Tribe of Florida. We highlight and pay respect to this history because we understand how the state of Florida and Florida State University came to be settled on these lands. We recognize this land is scarred with the painful past of enslavement, settler colonial violence, and the desolation of culture and the forced removal of indigenous bodies. Despite this, we respect the cultural and ceremony practices these indigenous nations maintain in and around Tallahassee today. As educators, we honor the knowledge of these tribes and their people and acknowledge that indigenous students, faculty, and administrators are vital to Florida State University. We embrace the decolonization of our educational systems and commit to disrupting suppressive systems through the explorations of many truths and lived experiences, and creating room for those who are often excluded by harmful colonial erasures in our practice and pedagogy. So with that, the first thing I thought we would do, just for 5 quick minutes, is to go around and you can just tell us your name, your year in the program, and what degree path you're in, so that everybody can have a little bit more familiarity with who's in the room. I'll go around the room here, and then we'll go around Zoom after that. So Alex, you want to start?
My name is Alex Marin. I'm a second-year PhD student in the EPE program.
And I'm second year in the IE program.
I'm Amber Noor Mustafa. I'm a second year PhD student in the IE program.
So back here. Hi everyone, Cameron Beatty, assistant professor in the department. I teach the higher ed program and the undergraduate leadership studies program.
My name is Khurshid. I'm the PhD higher ed program. I'm Melba. I'm a second year student in the PhD.
My name is Sean John, first year PhD student at I'm Khurshid Skillings, first year PhD in IE. My name is Sean Salek. I'm a first year PhD student in
I'm Marvan. I'm a first year PhD student in higher education.
Christine?
Christine Wilbur, faculty member in higher education.
Hi, Stephanie Solkowski, faculty member in ELP.
Hi, Melba Kakiba,
So back over here.
Casey Rutledge, faculty member in leadership and policy.
Hi, Tamara Bertrand Jones, higher ed faculty member.
And Alex, do you want to call anyone, see if they want to introduce themselves in our at-home audience? If anyone would like to, you can meet yourself or Alex can call you by name.
Eric Ludwig. Sorry, whoever I interrupted. Eric Ludwig, Director of Online EDD and Teaching Faculty in ELP.
Hello, everyone. Alonzo Gilzine, Assistant Professor in Education Leadership and Policy Studies. I think that's it. Yep.
Anybody else in our at-home audience?
Hi, everyone. This is Yang Li. I'm the third year PhD student in the higher education program.
Hi, everyone. My name is Boduri Akirimode, fourth year PhD student in APE program.
Hi, I'm Brittany Clausen-Pitts. I'm a fifth year student in the International and Multicultural Ed program.
And in the chat says, hi, I'm Kendra Bumpus. I'm a fourth year in the higher ed program.
Well, thank you all. And I think one positive externality of COVID is we've gotten a lot better at joining remotely, right? So we can all participate together in different capacities. I'm thrilled to introduce you today to two of our esteemed colleagues. You're going to hear from Melba Velasquez, a doctoral candidate here with us, And you're going to hear from Dr. Ayesha, Khurshid, a faculty member here with us. Two, as their research presentation says, demystify the research process. So with that, I'll turn things over to you guys, and thank you for doing this.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for joining us today. And we have been looking forward to this presentation. So speaking with Dr. Park, again, we kind of talked about what would be most useful for us as well as for hopefully many people here. So not just presenting on the empirical research that we have already completed, but talking about our new project that is in making right now. So feedback from you, input from you, and comments from you would be very helpful for us. But hopefully talking about the process itself would be helpful for some of you in terms of understanding what we are going through right now and what are different aspects of research that we are trying to be mindful of.
Yeah, so the format we're going to do is an overview. Is we want to start at what is this research about that we're collaborating on? How did we make connections and gain access, as well as why and how are we working and collaborating as a team? And we want to end with how do we maintain focus on being flexible by including our own positionality.
Okay, starting with this project. So this is a new project for both of us. And this project focuses on an indigenous Maya social community in San Cristobal, Mexico. This community converted to Islam around 25 years ago. And they have been living in that community, I think, for over 3 decades now. I think their grandparents moved to that particular location, and they have gone through this history of this location. And if any of you have heard of the Baptist movement in Mexico, that movement helped them to claim some of these lands on which they are living now, but they still don't have ownership of these lands. So the reason that we were interested in working with this community was we wanted to see that how do they combine their Islamic identity with their indigenous identity. So what are the processes of learning and unlearning that are involved in this identity formation? So what are they remembering and what are they trying to forget? For example, I think majority of women in this community, this indigenous Maya Muslim community, have opted to wear the hijab, the head cover. So so we are interested in questions of how does that change their status as well as their understanding of their status as a visible minority in a Christian dominant country like Mexico. And we are also interested in looking at how do members of this community educate themselves about the nuances of their complex identity that cannot be easily categorized in the identity markers that are available in their context, which is being indigenous, being mestiza, or being Christian. They're not fitting into that very neat. So how are they negotiating that? So this is a picture of one of the members of the community. You can see that she is wearing the hijab, but she's also wearing their traditional dress. This picture was taken in 2017 by a photographer from National Geographic, who published an article. So how did we get interested in this community or to learn about the community? Because my work has been focusing on Pakistan. I've done some work comparing Pakistan and India, but it has primarily been on Pakistan. And Melba's work focuses on the US. So I saw this documentary only by chance because I'm a news junkie, so I'm always reading news. So I came across this BBC documentary very short documentary on that. So I was thinking we can probably share that with you. So this was our first.
It should already have at least something. Yeah.
There we go.
Retirement income is complicated. As your broker, I've solved it.
That's great, Carl. But we need something better that's easily adjustable.
Has no penalties or advisory fee.
And we can monitor,
To see that we're on track.
like Schwab Intelligent Income. Schwab.
Introducing Schwab Intelligent Income, a simple, modern way to pay yourself from your portfolio.
Oh, that's cool. I mean, we don't have.
Schwab, a modern approach to wealth management.
أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن لا
بسم الله.
أشهد أن
Y te los vas a ayudar, te los vas a ayudar.
Pues yo me hice musulmán cuando yo tenía prácticamente casi cumpliendo 15 años, ¿verdad? Fui primero en toda mi familia. Yo no tenía idea de lo que era Islam.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا
Lo único que recuerdo fue este centro que tenemos aquí. Estaban sentados en el suelo y estaban cantando algo que yo pues prácticamente no entendía. Y eso fue lo que me llamó la atención. Invité a mi papá, mi mamá, mis tíos, primos, abuelos, gente que conozco de infancia, los llevé. Y afortunadamente pues todos se hicieron musulmanes y ahí es donde empezó a crecer la comunidad. Queríamos invitar para que nos acompañe en un convivio. Entonces, si gusta invitar a su señora esposa, hija o hijo, pues bienvenido a Don Bartolo. Para 200 personas más o menos. Son más o menos, realmente no creo que vengan las 200 personas, pero sí por lo menos, en total seremos como unos 100. Exacto. Muy bien. Tan fuerte el momentito. Qué bonito el sabor, se mezcla al fuego. Te pedimos que hagas en este día alegría para la umma del Islam, especialmente aquellos musulmanes que son oprimidos y que están siendo atacados. Y estaba toda la noche coordinando. Me dormí un rato, me levantaba para ver si estaba el fuego. Y ya se había apagado y volví a encender el fuego. Lo que hacemos nosotros es abrir nuestras puertas para que ellos también conozcan realmente qué es el Islam y qué significa ser musulmán.
So this was my
Do you regret
first introduction
Of course, I will regret it for the.
to the community. And I was like, oh, this is fascinating. And this was during the pandemic when I had nothing to do. I could not travel to Pakistan. I was supposed to travel to Pakistan. So this seemed just fascinating because I have worked with Muslim communities only in Muslim dominant countries. So I was like, well, if I could get access, that would be amazing. They're interested in working with me. And then I think that was, if there is any divine intervention, that was the divine intervention. Because I spoke to a relative, just discussing that, and he works for a nonprofit. And he's like, our nonprofit works with this community. And he is based in Canada. And he's like, I visited there 3 times and I've worked with these community members, even the ones who are in this document. So that was just extremely helpful, of course. Then he put us in touch with the leaders of the community, the imam, and then his sister. And then we started talking to them, and then Melba would share how we have been contacting them.
And so that's how our connections began. And we were able to get contact numbers from the mom and his sister. We connected through WhatsApp, which is very convenient. And we explained, like, what is our interest? Like, we would like to find out a little bit more about your community, about what it means in terms of your identities, and started a conversation just to introduce ourselves and to get to know them, and for them to be able to get to know us. And that led to video chatting regularly. So those meetings then began to be about sharing about ourselves, and they were sharing with us also. So family members are coming in to peek, behind the cameras. We got to meet the spouses, the grandchildren were there. So they got to meet us, like somebody walks behind us, who is that? So that was kind of building that whole relationship and the rapport. We also looked at, all right, these are our capabilities. This is what we are doing. This is what we're good at. Is there any way that you would be able to share what you're doing? What is the issues? Is there where we can be of some help to be able to support what you're doing or what is already in the works for you all? And so they were talking about registering an organization to be able to get funds from another NGO. So they said, maybe that would help if you would be able to. And we said, sure, that is within our back here. And I think that also helped to cement that kind of relationship where they're saying, this is what is going on in our community. This is what has happened over the years. And it was truly, building that kind of rapport, being able to go beyond just contact and saying, we'd like to do this, but if it's something like a symbiosis going on there. How did we have that kind of rapport? I think it just came over time. And we've been looking at how does that work? And I think when we look at moving on to working collaboratively, it's also about 2 things here. So it's not only about connections and access, but it's also about how are we working together, Dr. Khurshid and myself, and both of us with this community. So we could see where that would be tiered. The why, if we look at why, Dr. Khurshid mentioned our interests here, our research interests. So my interests are with Indigenous community. Indigenous women. I've also done a class paper with Muslim women. So a little background there from me in terms of that, but it's not something that I know a whole lot about. But Dr. Khurshid's interests are with Muslim communities, with Muslim women. So we could see where they complemented each other. Also, if we look at that communication, we're able to look beyond that complementarity and also look at connection. What connections do we have? I know Spanish. These my women speak their language, but they're able to use Spanish. So Spanish was their medium for communicating. Also, these knowledge systems. So we're looking at not only knowledge systems and Indigenous communities that Dr. Khurshid worked with, but my work with Indigenous communities also, and their knowledge systems. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. I know I'm jumping the gun by not explaining that. terms of connection specifically, we were looking at understanding their experiences constructively. So what is going on here? Examining those relationships, like right from the beginning, nothing dense, nothing intense, but also looking at that constant construction of identities and research. So we're looking at Muslim women, Muslim culture, that was enveloping all of this indigenous knowledge systems also. And the how. So since April, beginning of April, we've been talking to specifically like one of the Muslim women every Saturday. But before we call her and we talk to her about what's going on, Dr. Khurshid and I talked about, okay, what are some of the issues that we want to talk about? What are some of the questions that we want to ask them about so that we can build that kind of relationship where they know more about us and we know more about them. We also talked about the points that came up. After that video call, then we discussed what happened, how do we move from here? What are the things that we want to pursue? What are some of the things that we're learning and what is that thing? So that discussion was ongoing. When we look at this is a new community to us. We are new to them also, although there are many NGOs working in those communities and with those communities. We're not an NGO, definitely not. So we're looking at what are the insights that are coming across through those snippets of conversation. And there's a whole lot going on. I think Zoom allows us to be able to see a lot of the little things and nuances that would escape us, in another medium, or if we were there for just observation. So we're looking at things that are coming across in terms of culture, in terms of the community, in terms of their religion, and also their history. So when they talk to us about the Zapatista movement and that, how that influenced not only their land and property or lack of property, but what does that mean in terms of the social issues that were arising because of that? What are the political issues? And so all of that, is gathered through these little conversations about how long our video call. Usually an hour. About an hour where they, we don't want to take too much time from them. We have to be conscious that they have obligations and we don't want to intrude. We don't want to impose either. So in offering our support, that was something that we wanted to be very conscious of, that it's support only. We're not imposing in any way, but it's also showing the fluidity of that research that is ongoing, that is starting actually.
So this part, this is something that we are constantly trying to be mindful of and trying to engage with, and if you have any suggestions, we would welcome them. So we went in with a certain focus, but there are a number of things that we have to be very mindful of. First, both of us are not indigenous people, and that in itself is quite problematic, especially when it comes to research that has been done with indigenous communities, and even now some research that is going on with indigenous communities by researchers who are not from that background. So, so we wanted to be respectful. We also wanted to position their concerns, their issues at the forefront and be led by them. But what we keep kind of bumping into is that when we ask that, okay, what is it that you're interested in? How can we help? What are some of the issues that you would like us to focus on? And the response usually is this laughter and, whatever you want to do. And this is not the first time that, I've heard this response. I think we as researchers, when we go to the community and say, oh, we'll do whatever you want to do, it's a very difficult question to answer for that, because the way they're looking at research and the way we are looking at research is very different. and probably I should speak for ourselves that we were kind of thinking about it, that they understand what we're doing, but they don't. Like just, it's so normalized for us, but for people to say that, or somebody would come and just look at you or just ask you questions, or they're just interested in your life, it just sounds really weird. And then they're of course very nice, very hospitable. So they want to say no, and they want to, participate in that process. So this is something that Melba and I have been talking about, and we'd like to probably write on it, a methodological paper. That when we talk about consent, what is really consent? When people don't understand what research is, no matter how many times we explain it. Because what we understand and what they understand about the nature of research and its potential outcomes, it's just very different. So that's something that we're engaging with. So our next strategy, so to speak, was that let's see what's going on there and try to help them. And then it was registration of this community-based organization that they were really struggling with, because most of the people have not received quote unquote formal Western schooling. So they're not able to engage with the institutions. They don't have bank accounts. And because of being part of this indigenous rights movements, their relationship with the state has been very hostile. So they don't feel comfortable going to, the state institutions and banks and so on and so forth. So like, okay, fine, we are going to help you register for this organization. We started doing the paperwork, we started working with the state functionaries. And then we realized that how much politics is in there about this. It's not just about registering the organization, but whoever registers the organization becomes a leader of the community. So whoever has that power that they can register the organization takes on the leadership position. So we realized that we were actually playing with this, hierarchy, or kind of changing it in some ways without really realizing. So that was just, a really learning experience for us. Then in trying to be helpful, being helpful is not always helpful. So now that situation, as we started learning about it, we've been a little bit more, withdrawn with it and really letting them take the lead. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, that's okay. So those are the kind of issues, the methodological issues that I think in qualitative research we need to engage with more critically and in a more in-depth manner. The issues of consent, the issues of help, and I think sometimes I think we talk about probably ourselves not trying to represent everyone. That I think in trying to help, we kind of take on that activist role. But I don't think we can be activists for a community living in Mexico by being here. If we want to be an activist, we should go and live there. And that's what Melba and I were talking about. We should. So that I think really kind of has been a very helpful experience for us. All the power dynamics, power hierarchies that are embedded in this process. And we were able to be flexible because we just said that we don't know what's going on. We're going to give ourselves this much time, and we're going to put the structure around ensuring that we're able to interact with different members of the community. But we are not going to push ourselves to come up with this well-defined goal. So we will see how things emerge and evolve over time. And that has really helped us because we have been talking to the community since March, doing this kind of Saturday thing since April. Now we're going to Mexico in October, just spending time with them. This will not be formal data collection, but just kind of piloting the study. So we were able to, because it is a new community for both of us. And as Melba said, we're complementing each other in some ways. My focus on Muslim communities, Muslim women, familiarity with some Muslim cultures. Melba's work with Maya, healer women, and her interest in indigenous communities. But we are both not indigenous people. We're both not from Mexico. So there's a lot that we have done. And we're trying our best to be mindful of it and be respectful and not just go there and just extract knowledge but also kind of make it a more dialogic process as much as. And these are pictures from my previous work, and I just wanted to share it. Yes.
Is it okay if I ask a question?
Yes.
All right, cool. So you're speaking to how it seems like so far it's been a lot of informal data.
Yeah.
But at what point, because when I think about like IRB stuff, right? Or like when you actually have to kind of go through a formal process, when does it become actual, data that you have to inform others about? Because it sounds like for a while it's been you all figuring out, okay, what are we actually doing? Because in some ways I feel like if there is data collection happening, right? And so in theory, from in like a traditional sense, you would want to have first all that formalized first. But so where does that line get drawn?
Right. So I think IRB one should get, in my opinion, as soon as the community agrees to it, right? Because the IRB really is about protecting the community, in theory. It is about protecting the institution. But so I think broadly we know what we are interested in, right? We know we are interested in the fusion of Islamic identity and indigenous identity, right? How is it being integrated? What is taken in? What is erased to construct this new identity? So I think we can actually go to IRB with that and get the IRB approval and use some of this data if we want it. But I think in terms of the specifics of it, so the question for us is that fusion can be seen in any dimension of their lives, right? Now, which dimension are we going to look at, right? Which dimension we feel that we can learn from and the community would be comfortable in having us work with that. Like some things that we are interested in, the relationship with nature, for example, in some indigenous communities, most, I think, the indigenous philosophy positions nature as in a particular way, in a particular spiritual and sometimes religious way. With Islamic identities, depending on which step you follow, there's a different understanding of the relationship with nature. So that could be one area where you could look at that. Another area we were thinking was how certain folklores are retold, indigenous folklores are retold by the community who have converted to Islam as compared to the ones who have not. Because they're living together. The whole community lives together. Some of them have converted to Islam, others have not. We can also look at food, right? So the notion of education here, we're looking at it very broad, kind of learning and unlearning that is happening in the community about a particular identity and how that is taught through formal and informal, right? So we know the broader interest, but in terms of the specific way we want to look at it, I think that would have to emerge from this. So with IRB, my advice would be to get it as soon as the community feels comfortable and make it broad and especially for a research like this where it is going to be introduced, it is going to be observations of daily lived experiences, then it's up to us which dimension of it we end up with. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Thank you.
And that's a great question and great segue into this, my own positionality here. So I'm working with Yucatec Maya healers in Belize, and I'm using a decolonizing methodology, the Tree of Life, to look at how do they learn, how do they acquire, how do they practice, how do they transfer this traditional healing knowledge. So when Dr. Khurshid was talking about that binary of traditional knowledge and Western schooling or education systems, we look at it in terms of a binary. And these women are taught in that bind, as living in these times, but having all that knowledge that has been passed to them for so many generations. And if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, she was my first participant. She was 104 years old. And so when I didn't have IRB, I wanted to establish contact and to make sure that I built a relationship with these women And so every time I go visit her, I say, will you wait for me? And she says, but you have to hurry. So unfortunately, she passed away last March. And I know her being in ancestorhood, she's always here and being able to, in some way or another, help. So I got another participant in late October who agreed to be a part of it. But these women are looking at all this emerging new knowledge system. They're producing new knowledge, especially during the pandemic. It's amazing how these women are using their traditional knowledge. And I'm seeing it, interviewing them on Zoom during the pandemic. So it was amazing how I could actually see knowledge production occur. But I wanted more than anything else to tell you about my own caught in that bind between the traditional and the Western knowledge and academia. My struggles today. And how do I validate something that other people might say, this is no way, this is not qualified. This is not something that we can definitely credit. So I think it was more in my head than anything else, being able to look at those boundaries and those borders that I wanted to cross, or those that I was erecting for myself, but being able to do that. And I wanted to bring my vulnerability across to you in these words. So here then, I'm looking at Abuela said to expose the India, where justice exposes power, where duality is not polarity, but a coexistence. Abuela's soul bore the marks of networks across time, navigations of a warrior and a sage, changes of todo el pueblo deeply etched. She knows nada about the sleepwalker who threads the labyrinth of pesadillas, battling the miasma that approaches and sifting through the essence of her to awaken the eye. And so I've had to delve deep to slash up insecurities. I've had to rankle out performances. I've had to span the borders. I've had to claim a space. Hybrid. I stride across these halls unapologetic. I look into the glass reflections and portraits. I reach into myself, conscious the doors keep open. Privilege. Queen, chingona, bruja, India, sister. I reach across and begin to etch. And so this was literally what happened to me walking downstairs. This is about stone building the first time I came here. I'm privileged. It's not everybody in the league that can get privileged. It's not easy. And when I saw my reflection in those glass doors, it just hit me, If you look at you, who are you? And that who are you came up time and time again in my class papers. Because I didn't start with this project. It evolved and it changed me. As I changed topics, it changed me. And so I was looking at, who am I? If I were to be true to myself, I had to claim that I'm a hybrid, I'm a mestiza. And what does being mestiza mean? It means that I have an indigenous side that has merged with the colonizer. And I am, a foot in each world. What my ancestors did as colonizers to my ancestors who were indigenous. I had to claim that, and I struggled every time because race is a thing here in the US that race is not anywhere else in the world. And every time I said that, people would get angry in my class. Like, no, you're colored, you're black. Yeah, but that is not something that we think about when we are outside the US. I had to do that here. And it was good. I had to examine myself. And I had to look at what these women were also going through. So my own silences, how does academia silence me and how do I silence myself and how do I break this? Because those are bonds that I need to break. So how do I do that? And I had to do it through my writing. And I started writing poetry. And I changed because the first word, India, that wasn't there the first time. It was a soft conceding word like indigenous. The word that was there was indigenous, but that's not the word that my grandmother used. India was used for challenge, to bring up that was not good, as seen by others for the indigenous. India, done with that disgust and derogatory in that derogatory form, but it also meant courage, strength, bravery, in your face kind of thing with the chingona, being a sister, being the whole lot, And so I had to write it out. I had to be true to myself, and I could only do that by just, bleeding onto the page. That was what it was, and maybe bleeding is the right word, just bringing it out. And what do boundaries mean? What does boundary mean for me? What are the borders that I am placing, and what borders have been placed in front of me? So those are the things that I had to look at, and that is where the work lies. I would like to end with that for me, my position.
Thank you so much, Melba. And that's the conclusion from my end. And now we have discussion. Again, this is an ongoing process, and this is the first time I have presented next to the American flag, the US flag. So that's something I've been staring at it or something. So
just a comment. So Holly Henning mentions you have a very powerful voice and perspective. Felt like we want to hear that.
Ayesha, you mentioned that these communities, their idea about what research is very different from how so has this community evolved things? No, what are, based on your conversation, what you think are their idea about this?
So that's, as far as we know, they haven't participated in research. But since they are an indigenous community and they have converted to Islam, they receive a lot of attention from nonprofit. So they're going there, working with that. So we really have to kind of be mindful over time and realize that we have to really tell them that we're not that. We are not, a nonprofit. We don't have the resources or infrastructure to provide the kind of resources that these organizations can do. But we want to help. So that's a very fine line there. When we say we want to help, but with what? Like, what do we have to offer? And I think the best way we learn to explain is that we want to write a book. Because when we said research study, it was just not making sense. And that's not just this community. Every community that I've worked with, I don't think they understand. And they agree because they're curious, they're interested, mostly because they're nice. And they want to help. They like you and they're like, okay, we'll help you. But, and Melba can speak it too. So we have to define, that's what we want to write about. But how do we define research relationship in terms of the frameworks that are available to them? What does that mean, right? How do we want them to understand how we think about things, but how can we understand how they think? And how can we frame research accordingly? And that's why we wanted to be very flexible. We wanted to get a sense of what is it that they want us to do, because they won't tell us what we want. With this registration of the organization, that's another political issue. We realized there's another set of Muslims who are also their related part of the same community that live right next to them, that this community doesn't think of as we used to. So when we ask them who else is Muslim in their community, they completely censor them. So it's just like, I don't think we can even talk to them, right? So access in the community means to certain people means not having access to other people, right? So it's just like the concept of help and explaining what research is. So we had to kind of really accept this research hopefully would do something for them, but we would really have to figure that out, and imposing our concept of health is not going to help. It's like any other community in the world. It's a very politically charged context. Also because they're Maya, they're indigenous, they're Muslims. They're visible, hyper visible, and invisible simultaneously. So I think that makes it, so we are learning. But I think there are methodological issues that I really want to focus on. Because what I've been seeing as an observer for qualitative researcher for a long time, it's so obvious that those tensions and borders.
And to add, like for us students, I think there are some of the things that we don't even realize, like language. I'm speaking Spanish. She's speaking Spanish with me. And even then we have things lost in translation. So those are the things that we don't even think about when we're going to do research in another language. That there is one way that I speak Spanish, there's another way, and there's regional Spanish also going on. So I might know the Spanish that I speak at home or that I learned in school, which is much more formal. But even here, like when I talk to her and I say something, she says, but I don't think I understood what you meant. Like, okay, so let me break it down again and say it in a different way, because it is being lost. And then those are things that as a student, I know I did not think about. So when you talk about demystifying the process, I think Dr. Clark really had, us in mind when we talk about as students, those are some of the things that we don't think about.
And one thing that you had shared, that the only way the participants of Melba's research, the Hero Women, could make sense of what she wanted to do was that she wants to become. We're going to teach you. Wow. So they're always teaching her, and they're calling her all the time and saying, and then they test her. So tell me, how do you do that? And that happened in front of me on phone, that they're asking her. So tell me, what would you do with this? Because that's the only way they could make sense of what was going on.
And they do have that kind of pedagogy going on, like we're going to remember what we did in class last time, and then we're going to have some kind of PK, and then we're going to have a test, new information being, like as a teacher, I could analyze how they were doing it, and they have no idea that this is what you're doing. And so they test me. Okay, so last time we spoke about what plants and what are they good for? Like, you remember, like, come on. Like, it's funny the way they think, and they were talking in terms of riddles and stories, and they do the exact same thing to me. And so I would say, so how about this? And they tell me a story, and embedded in the story, the whole answer is woven. And that is exactly how they were taught. So if you weren't listening, that means you weren't interested, you weren't being good about, what you're supposed to do. So I have to be on my toes, or I had to be, but even now, Dr. Khurshid could witness, like, one will send me this information, that one will call me, that one will text me. And it's an ongoing relationship, even though data collection has already finished. But that is part of decolonizing methodology, that going with that respect, with that gratitude and that reciprocity. It's not about just giving back tangible things, but it's about giving of your time. It's about giving, of yourself as a person. And they thought, all of them thought that, we're losing this knowledge, so you're going to be a healer. And I said, I don't want to know how you learned this. Learn along the way. So it happens. And they say they force people into learning.
You spoke to navigating, not sharing identities shared identities with the community and trying to kind of work through that, and discussing sort of how your own research interests integrate to some degree, and also you have that connection with health. But that's a question that I often struggle with as well. Like, do I have a right to do this research, right? And often I think in my way, the simplest way to sort of navigate that is like shared identity, right? That seems to be one way. Can you speak to sort of how to navigate that? Because often I have ideas which I think would be really cool research ideas, but then it's like, well, should I be the one to even do this research? And maybe that is a fair question to just acknowledge the fact that sometimes no, like I shouldn't be the one, so, but how do you sort of work through, especially when you may not have shared identities with the community or population you want to study?
I think that's a great question, right? I mean, any idea of being interesting is not a reason good enough to actually do research, because there's so many interesting ideas, and do we have the right or capacity to do good research? And I've had other ideas that seemed very appealing for the time being, and then they moved away from me. So it's not a very academic answer, but this idea first stayed with me for quite some time. Second, when things just started falling in place very easy. And then I felt, okay, let's see if they are interested or not. That's when I spoke to Melba, because I don't speak Spanish. I'm trying to learn it, and those efforts are not going very well. I only understand Spanish if it's spoken in the accent that is on the app. So and that's only like a little bit. So I'm really don't have the skills or resources to actually, really work with the community. And that's where I thought Melba could help because of her experience of working with the indigenous community and linguistic skills and all the other intellectual resources that she brings to the project. So we started just by saying, let's see what's going on, if they're even interested. It was not that decision at that point, let's do research. Just let's see what happens. So we started those conversations, and they showed interest. They not just agreed, because again, that issue of consent is very important. So we have spent time from April until now, just kind of seeing, are they interested? It seems that they are. And we have done a little bit that we could do to support them in the things that they were doing, but that's certainly not sufficient. Methodologically, the way I see it is that them adopting Islam and trying to craft this new identity. So when we speak to them, I think most of the time they're talking about their identity. That indigenous Maya, Tzotzil identity, they hardly ever speak. And then we were curious about it, right? So then we realized that they don't have to talk about it because it's part of their lived experience. That's how they have been doing things for the longest time. Muslim identity is the new one. So they really have to articulate it. They really have to think about it, talk to someone who's Muslim. And I do identify as Muslim. I grew up in a Muslim culture. So I felt that those are the kind of, some of the knowledge that I could bring in to understand this fusion. So if you look at it, it is a fusion. What is happening? There is fusion that is probably happening everywhere, but in this case specifically. In terms of our team, it's also a fusion. And what we hope that we might be able to do is to have someone from the community as a researcher. So having team of 3 researchers. But again, the question is, what is it of use to them, right? Do they want to put their name on a book or an article? Not clear, right? So what value does it have for them? And that's what we need to learn. We can have an indigenous scholar or invite someone who's not from the community to work with us. That's another option that we're thinking about. But I mean, those are the questions that we have to answer. We would ideally like to have someone from the community, but again, you know, that's something that we have to see how we, but certainly we are very aware of power hierarchies, and it's, you know, it's not, it's very uneven.
Are any of the potential theoretical or methodological imports derived from previous research focusing on indigenous communities and the organic spirituality philosophies that relate to identity and their relationship with nature, such as like Amerindian perspectives?
Yeah, so I think we are using decolonizing methodology that is developed by different indigenous scholars. We are relying very heavily on the literature that they have produced about working with indigenous communities. And again, and I think Melba can speak more to it because her current research is using that. I have not used indigenous methodologies previously in my work. I have learned about them, but I have not used it, but Melba has.
So in indigenous epistemology, if you look at it for the Mayas, the tree of life, the ceiba, is what joins the underworld, this physical world, and the heaven. So it's not only joining that, but it also joins space and time. So that space that is all in between this way, but it's also in between this way. So it envelops the cardinal points and everything that exists in between. So it looks at the past, the present, and the future. All of them interconnect. So there's a fluidity. So when I look at my research, the methodology is a tree of life. So it starts at the roots with an issue that the community identified. There's a loss, a perceived loss in indigenous healing knowledge. The trunk itself is about the theories that I'm using in my research. The branches are how this is acquired, looking at the data collection. The fruits are how we're going to use this research to bring it back to the community, and what are the seeds that are sown after this has gone back to the community. And that is my research methodology, and my data collection happened in the same way. My questions are set according to the origin, the roots, the middle, the trunk, and so forth. And I look at the women themselves, they're that, you know, and the roots are the ancestors that brought them in their healing knowledge. And they go from saplings to trees, and as they're growing, they're adding to their trunk. As they practice, they're adding to the trunk. And then they disseminate that information through their branches. And they're hoping to bear fruit, not just be infertile, but be able to have those seeds fall into fertile ground that they are, and it's happening. They're nourishing this kind of knowledge right now through their grandchildren. So thanks for that question.
Thank you.
I got the first one.
So let me, one thing I think this was fantastic. So the goal and hope of this is really to kind of get everybody's perspective of how do you do this research? Neither one of them said, oh, I woke up one morning, we had a site visit in Mexico, and that's what we were doing, right? But to help demystify that overall process. In 2 weeks' time, we're going to have our next R3. The topic of that R3 is understanding the legislative ban importance that bans teaching critical race theory in K-12 schools. This affects all of us, some of us directly, some of us more indirectly, but all of us in one way or another. Dr. Khurshid has agreed to be part of that discussion, as is Dr. Chris Small and Dr. Cameron Beatty. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of the discussion is over, when I say critical race theory, do we all understand what that means? Are we all on the same page? Do we understand what legislation did and what it didn't do? Do we understand intended and unintended consequences? And can we start to make meaning of why did this happen? Looking at other contexts and other states and whatnot. So that's our topic for 2 weeks from now. I'll always announce 2 weeks out where we're headed next. We have some interesting presentations coming up. I can't thank you enough all for coming out here today and for those joining us at home. And I hope to see you again in 2 weeks.